This week on MT Web Inc. we have Timothy Peacock, CTO and co-founder of Tone.
I just threw myself into freelancing. I said, I want to start making money with this, even if I'm not too experienced. I'm just going to go in and I'll just figure it out as I go. I blossomed. I started learning so much. I just started learning by doing. I learned by necessity. I wasn't experienced enough to understand, like, maybe a contract or whatnot. And they would always try to squeeze more and more and more out of me before they would pay me. Back in my early days, I was really bad with pricing. I would way undercut. And then I went on to learn assembler, which is very, very low level. I had this obsession that I needed to get as close to the hardware as I possibly could. One of the really cool features of nodeJS is that it is the server. You can Google any technology and learn how to use it in a matter of a day or so just to get by and get a product to somebody.
This Sunday, MT Web Inc. presents Timothy Peacock, full stack developer.
If you're still using plain old CSS, you really need to get into Sass or less.
Hey, so today's guest is Timothy Peacock, and one of the things that stands out to me about Timothy is his willingness to put himself out there and connect with people and do new things. We spoke a lot about freelancing in the interview, and perhaps this is a theme that I will dive deeper into with developers in future interviews. I hope you get something from it. Let's dive right in there. So Timothy, I thought I'd start by asking you, how did you get to where you are today?
So I actually originally got interested in computers and programming at the age of 12. And that's pretty early for most people. But I had the privilege of being homeschooled all the way through grade school. So I had a lot of extra time in the day to just, be curious about things. And computers just seemed to be like this magic box that I was always curious about. So one day I searched on Google, how do you make a program? Because I was like, I want to learn how to make a program. I'd like to do that. And that's the whole thing that started my entire career in programming and web development. But I actually didn't get to web development for a little while. I actually started off scripting in something called Batch, which is a Windows scripting language. And then I went on to learn assembler, which is very, very low level. I had this obsession that I needed to get as close to the hardware as I possibly could, so I could understand it, because I really wanted to understand it. And so I think that's given me a unique perspective on programming, even as I go into web development, because I have an understanding of how computers work. And so from there, I learned about web development, and I was like, wow, this is cool. I can reach all the people out there in the world with what I do, and it's not even that hard to learn. And so I started to learn HTML and CSS, and from there, I just threw myself into freelancing. I said, I want to start making money with this, even if I'm not too experienced. I'm just going to go in and I'll just figure it out as I go. Sure. And so I threw myself in there, and I blossomed. I started learning so much. I just started learning by doing. I learned by necessity, and then from there, I just grew my skills in web development and eventually settled where I am now and standardized.
What were the first projects that you took on for clients?
I actually remember my first one. It was a landing page that was just completely HTML and CSS, and that was it. It was perfect. It raised my confidence so much. It was very simple. It was for what you call a niche site, where they make the website just to gain ad revenue. But I only got paid $10 for it, but that was the first time I actually made money.
How did that feel?
Oh, it was amazing. That was actually the first time I made money in my entire life. Actually, it was my first generated income.
How old were you then, Timothy?
I believe I was 13.
Whoa. You definitely started early.
Yes.
Right. So you're accustomed to working with clients then, right?
Yes.
Right now.
Yes. Oh, there were some terrible ones and there were some great ones. It was pretty crazy. I've had a couple where I wasn't experienced enough to understand like maybe a contract or whatnot, um, and they would always try to squeeze more and more and more out of me before they would pay me. And sometimes they wouldn't even pay me at all because I didn't give them what they thought they wanted because they just kept asking for more and more and more. And there's been several projects where I've just had to take that loss and not get paid just to get out of the project because it was so overwhelming with how much they were trying to put on me in a short amount of time and very little money. And it was out of the scope of what the original plan was for the
Yeah.
project.
Scope creep.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I like about being a freelancer is we can fire the client.
Yes.
At what point along that path did you begin to get involved in JavaScript? Because I understand primarily you work in nodeJS, is that right?
Hmm. Yeah, so I actually learned JavaScript pretty early on in freelancing as well. I guess maybe a couple projects down, just out of necessity because they were asking for that functionality. I was also big in PHP back then. Now I steer clear away from PHP. But yeah, so I kind of started learning JavaScript from early on, and I started using jQuery as kind of like a helper to get into JavaScript because it's pretty easy to start learning with jQuery.
Yeah, I've started to learn a little jQuery, and I'm unsure as to where to go because a lot of what I hear out there is people talking about how like people are moving back to using JavaScript because the browsers it's becoming more standardized.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's becoming a language that's multi-purpose. It's becoming a general language for more than just web development.
So would you say like someone who's starting out, maybe they know some HTML and CSS and they're thinking of taking it to the next level and perhaps learning JavaScript, um, should they learn jQuery or does jQuery slow the site down now? Is that the approach?
I guess it's really just all about what you're trying to do. For me, I primarily use AngularJS on the front end, so I really don't need jQuery because AngularJS, the way it's structured, it really eliminates the need for jQuery. Um, but if you're just doing some simple JavaScript stuff to make the site, functional, and you're not really doing any like MVP frameworks or anything, I would say definitely learn jQuery. It'll help you out in the long run with JavaScript. But I definitely encourage going deep into JavaScript so you understand how it works.
So learn the basics.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
For those that are watching that perhaps don't know too much about Node.js, can you tell us a little more about like what it does and why it's so well it's special to you, right?
Yeah, oh, definitely.
Why is it
Well, I
so
mean,
special?
the main thing is that it's JavaScript. You can code an entire backend in JavaScript, and one of the really cool features of Node.js is that it is the server. What you write is the server. It handles the client requests and responses inside of your program. So it's down at the lowest level. So you have control over everything. So Node.js is it's a non-blocking structure. So basically, if you have a whole bunch of clients trying to talk to your website and get information and request files and whatnot, and the traditional PHP server, you would have to, if one client was like the thousandth client like trying to talk to the site, it would have to wait for all the rest of the 100,000 or 1,000 or whatever clients to get their responses in order for it to get its response or whatever. So if you have a big website and there's a lot of traffic, it could lead to latency and it would take a little while to get your information. So with Node.js, it handles that in a way that one client requests something, and then it can go off and take other client requests, and once it gets that data ready, it'll respond back to that person and give them their stuff. So it can take on a whole lot more traffic at once, and that is really good for scalability. But the coolest thing is that it's a JavaScript.
I can see a great advantage there in that, okay, if my server's in JavaScript and I'm writing on the front end in JavaScript, then in terms of, you could get very, very proficient in JavaScript.
Oh, definitely. In terms of learning a new stack, I would say that learning the man stack or mean stack, mean meaning with Express.js, which is a framework for Node.js, that's you learn very quickly just because they all use the same language.
You mentioned PHP earlier, so let's get into that because PHP gets a bad rap, and I understand that it has a bit of a dirty history, shall we say?
Yes, most definitely.
Being a WordPress developer myself, I figured, okay, I spend a lot of time in WordPress, perhaps I should build on my strength and get into PHP.
You should definitely strengthen your skills in PHP if you're working in something like that. My thing with PHP is that, well, it was the first dynamic programming language for the web, the first one. So it's definitely got some issues, and the servers that it runs on are overly complex and often have issues. And as the language itself, it's an okay language, but it could definitely have some improvements.
Is nodeJS mean stack, man stack, is that the way forward now, do you think?
In my opinion, yes. I see that it's catching on in the communities, and it's becoming sort of a standard. Ruby on Rails is also doing the same thing. They're kind of head and head right now. But as for Ruby on Rails, it's a little bit more bloated, and there's a lot of magic that goes on. So if you're okay with not knowing how things work, Ruby on Rails may be okay with you. But I kind of have this thing where I need to know how it works so I can fix anything that happens with the server.
You're a CTO. Maybe you can share with us how that opportunity came about.
It's a funny story. My second oldest brother, he plays video games all the time, and he makes new friends on those video games. And it just so happens that my CEO, he played games with my brother. And he asked my brother one day, he's like, do you know of any programmers? Because I need a programmer. And he's like, yeah, my younger brother's a programmer. And so then we got connected, and the rest is history from there. So it was kind of a chance thing, but I'm so very thankful that it happened.
So Timothy, I know that starting out, one of the things that I struggled with was when you eventually do get a lot of opportunities coming your way, and you have to be a little more selective as to what job you take. So is there a process that you would go through to ascertain as to whether it's the right job for you? And if so, like, how do you get from the client what it is they actually want?
Okay, so mainly what I'll do is I'll just order them for, how interesting they are to me. Because you're going to want to work on a project that's more interesting. So I'll primarily pick the most interesting ones, the most interesting opportunities that come up instead of, the other ones, even if they might pay a little bit more. Now, if it's a very, very, very big sum of money, then I might go for that one. Just because, you got to bring some bread home. But but primarily it'll be what interests me.
Once you've looked at it and it inspires you, like, how do you have like a discovery process you would go through with the client? Like, do you meet on Skype? How does that go?
Yeah, well, it really depends on the person. Sometimes they don't really like to talk in voice, but regardless, I will ask them to give me a couple websites that they kind of want their website to look like and function like. Give me a couple examples, and I'll just go through a clarification process and just go through the entire plan and try to make sure that everything is clear. And I've learned from the past, I make sure to tell them that if you want to add anything to this, it's going to cost more. See, back in my early days, I was really bad with pricing. I would way undercut because I really didn't understand how much people were charging in the industry. So that might have led to a lot of my success in getting jobs. But yeah, I learned that don't underestimate yourself when it comes to pricing. Don't be afraid to charge, or ask for too much, because they'll always bring it down to a level that they're comfortable paying.
Yeah, so if you pitch too low, then they can whittle you down even further. And I think it's all about finding a win-win situation, isn't it?
Yes, most definitely.
When is a person ready to take on a paying client? Like, how much of a skill level does one really need before they should take on paying work, in your opinion?
It depends. It depends on if you're proficient in Googling or not. If you can understand how to program at the basic level and understand the logic behind it, you can Google any technology and learn how to use it in a matter of a day or so just to get by and get a product to somebody. That's maybe not the best way of doing it, but if you want to throw yourself in and start learning quickly, that you can definitely do that and get by with it. So if you feel comfortable doing that, I'd say by all means go in. That's how I learned really fast at a young age. But if you're not comfortable doing something like that, I would say just take some time and do some personal projects and learn until you're comfortable with the languages that you're using or technologies that you're using.
I think that's the good thing about this industry is we have Google. The chances are someone's already come across the problem that you're dealing with and has already posted the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I've only posted one Stack Overflow question, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe two.
Yeah.
Most of the time they're already answered.
It's very true. So what's the next step for you in 2015? What do you want to learn more of, or is there something new you want to move into?
I think primarily in web development, I want to just tighten up my skills. I want to become better with the standards that I use when I'm actually coding and just make more beautiful code. Especially with CSS, because CSS can get out of hand pretty quickly. You gotta have a kind of like a checklist that you follow to make sure that your CSS is maintainable. That's the biggest thing. Is just making code maintainable. And other than that, I've actually been really interested in kernel development. This is outside of the realm of web development, but I've actually kind of has to do with web development. What I'm trying to do, I really want to make it like a user interface for an operating system that is completely scripted in HTML and CSS and JavaScript. So anybody can customize how their entire operating system looks just by creating HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Mm-hmm.
So what you mentioned there in regards keeping CSS and your code maintainable, should developers at the moment, front-end developers, be learning Sass or less?
Yes, definitely. I use Sass every day. Sass is an amazing technology. I would say if you're still using plain old CSS, you really need to get into Sass or less now, because it really increases your workflow once you start using it. And it seems a little scary at first, but it's actually really easy to get into. you can make a SAS document that has all of your colors and all of your standard margins and paddings and all of that in one, you know, kind of like configuration SAS file. And then throughout the rest of your project, you can just plug in those variables. And then if you ever wanted to change it for the entire website, all you have to do is just change that configuration SAS file sort of thing, and instantly it's done.
Right. So this is a step closer to writing, as you put it, beautiful code. Right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
Yeah, which I think as programmers, that's what we should all be striving for, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's poetry, basically.
Mm-hmm. To be as concise as we can.
Yep, most definitely.
So who in the web development field, like, is there anyone in the web development field that you admire or respect? Like role models that maybe you could share with us?
I would say Trevor from DevTips. He's pretty awesome. He has a great attitude, and he's really down to earth. He tells it like it is, and he's not afraid to tell people that, hey, I'm a beginner at this too. I'm just
Yeah.
you know, I'm just seeing how it goes. So he's very relatable in that sense.
He's doing a great job of building the community.
Oh, yes.
And bringing the community together.
His video production quality is fantastic.
Yeah. I definitely, in preparation for making a thumbnail for this interview, I had a peek at his thumbnail.
Yeah, he's really good at the thumbnails.
He has some cool ones there, for sure. All right, awesome. Well, Timothy, I want to thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to share with us your journey. And perhaps the listeners at home, if there's any questions, anything you wanted Timothy to expand on further, post your comment below. And Timothy, perhaps if you're free and I can get a hold of you, we'll bring you back on.
Sure, I'd love to do that.
All right, Timothy, you take care.
You too. Bye-bye.